For me, growing up with Paul Simon, it was just so incredibly special to meet him. I was such a fan that I think I had every song, the lyrics from every song, I could recite them to you, you know. As a matter of fact, when I went to visit him in New York City at his flat, and he lived on Broadway, or should I say he had a flat on Broadway where his studio was. When I got there, this was in December, and I had all this stuff to carry, and it was snowing, and in my mind I had the lyric, "A winter's day in a bleak and dark December." You know, it was perfect. And I figured I should have something to bring to him. So there was a little deli down on the street, and I went in and I got a jar of fresh squeezed orange juice. And the reason I did that is because I had the lyric, "Drank all the orange juice that we could hold," which is one of his lyrics. And so I took him fresh squeezed orange juice. I also took him a roll of my illustrations. And, you know, I was pretty gobsmacked, and I call it drooling. You know, I gave him the prints and I gave him the orange juice, and I said, "It's so nice to meet you." And he said, "Okay, you done? Are you done drooling?" And I said, "Yeah." And he said, "Let's get down to work." Dick Boak here at the original North Street Martin Guitar Factory for another episode of Signature Stories. And today we're going to be talking about Paul Simon. And I'm holding the OM-42PS, a well-played guitar by Paul. Very special little project. One of the greatest guitarists of all time and singer-songwriters, and such an honor to have worked with him. Paul was affiliated somewhat with Roger Sadowski, my really good friend in New York City. Roger Sadowski is a maker of bass and electric guitars primarily, and especially very revered in the bass guitar community. And Roger is a longtime friend of mine. Roger had contact with Paul because he was doing some repairs for Paul. And Roger put me in touch with Paul's management. Of course, I had been a huge fan of Paul Simon from the very, very early days of Simon and Garfunkel, I guess high school, and or maybe even junior high school. So I was just kind of godsmacked at the notion of working with Paul. I knew he had Martin guitars. I had seen all the photographs of him. He had actually a 12-fret dreadnought, which on Paul Simon, because he's a smaller person, the 12-fret dreadnought on him was enormous. But I arranged through Roger to talk with his management, and eventually set up a meeting in New York City. What happened was Paul decided that he really wanted to take a drive and come out to Nazareth. So this preceded my visit to New York. So on the day that Paul was coming, it was a funny story. I was particularly worried about the employees when Paul came. I didn't want 450 employees to be chasing him around the factory asking for his autograph. So I made an announcement early in the day before he arrived that Paul was coming and that it was for business, and we appreciate no autographs. So I was taking Paul around on a tour. He was with his son, Harper, who was a teenager at the time. And we were going around the factory, and the employees were behaving themselves really great. And we got about halfway through, and Paul looked at me kind of confused, and he said, "Don't they know who I am?" It was very funny. And I explained to him, and he said, well, I would have gladly signed autographs. And I said, how about 450 autographs? And so he did understand. He did sign a couple of autographs that day, especially toward the end of the day. So we had a great time on the tour, and after the tour, the front conference room, I had taken out of inventory about at least 25 guitars, and I had them all tuned up and on stands, and there were the guitars represented all the different neck widths, all the different scale lengths, and all the different body sizes and shapes, because he didn't know exactly what he wanted to use. I think he didn't want the 12-fret dreadnought. So he played them all. He played every guitar and the neck, and he said, well, I like the neck width on this one, and I like the body shape on this one, and I like the body depth on this, and I like that headstock. And, he really knew what he wanted. And this is the result. We actually made 3 prototypes. He wasn't quite sure about whether he wanted an OM or an M. They're very, very close in size, about a half an inch difference, the M being about half an inch larger than the OM. So I made 1 M size and 2 OM sizes, and I packed them up and drove them into New York City to SIR Studios, which is a pretty famous rehearsal studio in New York City. And Paul was rehearsing for his Broadway show, The Cape Man. So when I arrived and lugged the guitars upstairs into a little holding area and could watch through kind of a plate glass window into the studio where he was doing the interview and playing some music. When he finished, he came out, saw the guitars there. It was just a tiny little area, and he sat down on the floor with me, and we unpacked the guitars, and I handed him each one, and he said, boy, I like this one, and then I handed him the next one. This one's pretty good too, and he liked them all, really. Ended up leaving one of the OMs and the M size guitar, which he also thought was unique. He took me into the little area where the probably 144 channel, 272 channel boards were. He had just finished recording Bernadette and motioned to have it play back. So they rewound the tape, and he had the controls, and he said, and he was listening to assess how the recording went. And interesting thing was, he turned his vocals all the way off, and he turned to me and he sang the song directly to me with just the backing track playing. So unbelievable. I can't believe Paul Simon is singing to me. It was just amazing, So that's very memorable. I'll never forget that. Afterwards, he played all 3 guitars, and this is the result. He decided upon the OM. It's a OM-42, 42 appointments, a little OM pickguard, a toned mellow yellow top. The neck width is not standard OM. It's 1 11/16. Smaller hand, didn't need the OM extra width on the fretboard, and that's really the unusual thing about this OM, is that it's a narrow neck. Dark bindings, tortoise color bindings, which is a little different for an OM. Open geared tuners. These are the Waverleys, which I preferred. Style 45 backstrip. Aside from appointments of the instrument, Paul's signature, I would have him sign maybe 25 times. And then I would pick the best P and the best AUL and the best S, and I would kind of recreate his signature in the optimum way, and then I would increase the thickness of the lines to make it possible to actually cut the pearl pieces out. If you don't increase the thickness of the lines, the pearl breaks. So I'm very happy with the signature. He liked it too. It's kind of an optimized signature. Of course, he's playing on stage, and the addition of the Thin Line Gold Plus Natural 1 pickup made by Fishman, my favorite pickup, and one that I typically always wanted to install in artist guitars where they were going to be using it on stage. There's no controls on board, just plug in, sending a signal, and it is battery powered, so it's an active signal, so the signal can actually make it through a 20-foot cord into the soundboard or amplifier, and that's important. If it's a passive pickup with no battery, the signal dissipates over a 20-foot cord and doesn't make it all the way to the amp. This one, I don't really know what happened here, but it's got a crack in the top. It must have been really out of humidity control. There's lacquer checking across the top. There's scratching from playing. And here's a little bit of Paul's DNA. You know, it's really great to see that this got used so much. In a situation where you're bringing something special like this to an artist, how could they not love it? He loved it. And he's been playing it ever since. I see him even a couple of months ago, I saw him perform using his prototype. And it really sounds great. And we had intended to do 500 of these. I don't think we did all 500, which in hindsight I think is unusual because Paul is a great acoustic player and certainly deserving of selling all 500 of them. I think if it had been promoted better, they would have all sold. But typically we didn't really promote them beyond writing a story in the sounding board and sending the sounding boards out to the dealers, really. And then depending on them to kind of blindly order. And in a situation like this, a dealer could order one and wait for it to come in and wait for it to sell, and then maybe say, well, maybe I'll order another instead of ordering 10, you know. So sometimes the limited editions sold out immediately, and sometimes the dealers just waited. Well, this was not a cheap guitar. It was an expensive guitar. I don't remember the exact retail, but I think it was retailing for above $8,000. And I felt that there would be an opportunity if we did a lesser priced model, similar to what we did with Eric Clapton. So this is still an OM. This is called the Paul Simon II. Still has Paul's signature, but instead of 42 style appointments, it's scaled down to a simple pearl rosette with kind of a standard style 18 tortoise binding. Has a beautiful little earth inlay. Paul at the time, having done Graceland and then his Brazilian album, was really being celebrated as kind of a world music artist. So this model was considerably less expensive, kind of like the Eric Clapton project. This would be the poor man's Paul Simon model. Of course, Paul liked it, but he preferred his fancier guitar and continued to appear on stage and on video with the more expensive model. This guitar did fairly well. Didn't live up to what I thought the potential was for it in terms of numbers, but it is tonally the same guitar as the OM-42PS. My friendship with Paul has been maintained through the years, and I whenever I have anything that is Paul Simon related, I often pop him an email, and he answers me right back. And just a couple of days ago, I had a communication with him. He's really very down to earth. That was my signature story about Paul Simon. And tune in again for our next signature stories with some of the greatest artists of our generation.